I'm Charles Galda, President of Vision New England, and your host for the Church in Action.
Vision New England has a rich history of impacting New England with the gospel of Jesus Christ, because our desire is that all might be saved. This week, we're talking about that history during what I call the Don Gill years. What God did, who was involved, maybe some fun stories to honor our history and those who've served so faithfully. We'll be talking with Dennis Gill and Gordon MacDonald. Dennis is Don's son and a well-known church planter and pastor and a director of Vision New England. Gordon, you all will know as a very frequent member of the Church in Action, in addition to being a well-known pastor, author, mentor, and coach, and a member of our advisory board. Gordon, Dennis, thanks for being with us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah, thank you.
So Dennis, let's start out with you. Just if you could flesh out your bio just a little bit more.
Yeah, well, in the early 70s, I came to Boston. Don had come to take over the Evangelistic Association of New England. And I was just a long-haired hippie freak, frankly, coming out of Southern California. And I planted at Boston University and became quickly involved with a college ministry at Park Street at that time. But also, Dad was just up the street at Tremont Street at the offices of the VNE, and I was studying some communications and other kinds of things at BU. So I started to work alongside him in different projects. So that's where things kind of began, and I went into full-time ministry, began here in the Massachusetts area. I spent 25 years outside of New England in North Carolina, planted church there, and then was up in Princeton, New Jersey. About 17 years ago, came back to this area.
You've repented of that time, right?
I did. I'm from away. I understand. I'm from away. I'm back. Okay. So 17 years ago, came back to the area, and part of it was to kind of come alongside my dad in his elder years and some of the ministries he was involved with, and be somewhat bi-ministerial in the sense that I wanted to remain in the local church. And I'm at Hope Community Church for the last 14 years up in Newburyport, and then working at large, different organizations and ministries.
And maybe just to connect a dot for folks who may not know our history, our official name even today is still the Evangelistic Association of New England. But the work we do is as Vision New England is how most people know us today, but just want to connect that dot to what Dennis was saying, because that is our founding name back from 1887. And so now, Dennis, tell us a little bit more about your dad. What was his bio, Don?
Well, Dad came out of Gordon College. That's where he met Mom. She was a secretary. Gordon at that time was right across from the Gardner Museum. Now it's college and under college, but they met there, and that's where my history begins, because he ended up in doing some youth ministry. That's when youth ministries are just starting to kind of explode, and he was in the New York area. Gordon would remember High BA, High School Born Againers. He was kind of a regional youth ministry, and then
very well.
But yeah, and
I remember that very well.
Yeah, he obviously didn't see that as long term. So he ended up working with the NAE, National Association of Evangelicals in D.C. I was born in Long Island, but that's where my childhood was. And he worked there for many years with them up on Capitol Hill and congressional quarters and things like that with the NAE. And then he went to World Vision out in Southern California. He was there in the Pasadena, Monrovia area at that time. And that's where my youth years were. So he was kind of an evangelical insider in the whole neo-evangelical movement, and watching and moving around different organizations until the Lord then called him in 1969 to come back. And at that point, the EANE was pretty fledgling in its strength, but he came in over to Tremont Temple and kind of took the headship there, and was there for 20 years. Leading the organization, and then handed it to Steve Macchia, and then history kind of flowed from there. But that's how that was basically his calling.
And Dennis, do you know the exact years of when he started with Vision New England, and when?
I think it was 69 he started, and I think it was 89 or 90 when he finished. So it's about 20 years.
Okay. And he was a journalist as he came in. Wasn't he doing journalism?
He was. In fact, one of the things he did in the midst of several, as he was part of a Catholic evangelical dialogue that still goes on today. And he is one of the few people in his latter days that could say, I was at Vatican II.
Wow.
He was there as an evangelical press agent and was on there for 3 months in the third session. And he gets around my Catholic brothers. It's like, whoa, here's one that was at Vatican II. Anyways, he was doing press work, did a lot of journalism, magazine work with World Vision. So he was very much in the journalism editing world.
Got it. Interesting. Well, Gordon, let's bring you in here. And so while all of this time that Dennis is talking about, 69 to 89, where are you?
In 69, I would have been in southern Illinois on the St. Louis, Missouri orbit. That was my second church. My first one was during seminary days in Denver. And each weekend, my wife Gail and I would drive out 175 miles to this little farm church of about 60 people. And they were so gracious to me. They let me preach my heart out. I have no idea what it did to them. But then when I got out of seminary, I went to Southern Illinois. And then in 1972, I got a letter from a place called Grace Chapel here in the Boston area. And after a bunch of conversations and visits, I became pastor there in 1972.
So
There were 20 churches beyond that, but
sorry.
the third church I served was in excuse me. The third church I served in was in after Lexington, was in the heart of New York City,
Okay.
on 61st Street at 50th, and that was sheer recreation to be in New York City for several years.
And so when did you leave Grace Chapel that time to go to New York City?
You appropriately talk about at that time in 1984.
Okay.
I came back and did 7 more years in 1993.
Okay. So you're overlapping a good portion of Don Gill's time.
Yes, Don Gill was one of the very first people I met when I came to Lexington. When I say that in terms of pastors or organizational leaders, about the 5th day that we had arrived and I was just unpacking a few books at the church office, I heard the door open and in walked this guy who introduced himself as Don Gill. And he was full of enthusiasm. We sat and talked. I can't imagine how long. But he got me convinced to join a Bible study that he was doing for pastors. And once a month, I would drive down to Wellesley, to the lovely home you guys had down there, and sit in a circle and talk about the Bible. So he just kept pushing me in an affectionate sort of way. Come closer, come closer. And so we formed a firm friendship in those early days, because he was, relatively speaking, not a whole lot more experienced in New England than I was. So we learned together.
And so now I feel inadequate because I just had breakfast with Grace Chapel's new pastor. So similar story, but I'm not doing a Bible study and I didn't go to his office. I met him in a Panera. I'm doing it all wrong.
The new man is really a great guy, isn't
he? Yeah. Very much. I know he went up to visit with you as well, Gordon, which I thought was great. And so if you think back, what are some of the more affectionate memories you have of that time? Whether that's about people or something you saw God do or something else?
Well, I think when you're operating at Don Gill's level, you're going to get caught up in a vision. Don was the consummate visionary. He was always thinking possibility, always thinking about ways you could be used of God even better than you were doing. So if you wanted to quiet your life a little bit, stay away from Don Gill, because he'd have something for you very, very quickly. And he'd call me and, so-and-so is a new man in town. He would really profit from having a lunch with you. And so he was always hooking you up with people. And I got a kick out of that. When I saw Don coming, I was forewarned. But later in the years that we worked together, this is a very precious memory. We were both approached, along with the pastor at Park Street Church, Paul Toms, about engaging in a massive new North American evangelistic program. This was mid-1980s, 1990s. And Don and I and Paul Toms at Park Street Church had a lot of conversation because none of us thought strategically this was the right thing for New Englanders to get into. New Englanders are very suspicious of fast-moving, loud-talking stuff. And so none of us really were interested in that kind of a thing. And we told the sponsoring organization that we would probably not partake in this. But then I called Don Gill and I said, Don, it occurs to me that if we're not going to be involved in this thing, we've got to then create something different with which we can be involved. And Don agreed, so did Paul Toms. And so we started having meetings at my office in Lexington. Every month, these guys would come for a full morning. And we added one or two more, somebody from the seminary up in Gordon Conwell. But for about 3 years, we did this. My secretary nicknamed us the Lexington Seven. What we did during those hours is we simply talked about Jesus and the Church in New England, because the Church in New England was really struggling. Pastors did not normally unite with each other. They played the Lone Ranger game. So this required great care to get people together. And somebody had the idea, Don, me, or Paul Toms, let's budget one day a month and we'll go out across New England 2 by 2 and we'll call on pastors and we'll do a thing at lunch, at breakfast time, and in another place a thing, and then Thursday at night for supper. And in that way, Don Gill and Paul Toms and me and one or two others, we blanketed pretty much the whole 6-state area in about 5 years. And every place we went, we taught people to pray for the governor of their state and the political structure, for the poor, for issues of that type. And pastors began getting to know each other because of these calls. And I look back and say in those days, what a wonderful privilege we had to meet. We were up in Newport, Vermont, all the way down to southern Connecticut. And Don and I often did these together as a couple. And that meant that we got to do a lot of talking about, our sons and other people like that. But that carries a warm spot in my memory and always will, because now I look back and realize something was starting there. Something was happening that would reap fruit 10 years later. And as the years went by and the whole movement of Vision New England grew, you could see how the pieces had been put together. And to be able to say, sometimes I'll even say it today, I was there when they did that. I was there when they did this. But the 1970s were a very strong turnaround for anyone who cared for the church in New England.
So, Dennis, plug into that. What are you remembering from that period?
Well, I can take it back to 69 or 68. Dad was working at World Vision. He knew that his time was pretty much done there, and he had 3 opportunities. And one of he would often talk about this. He said, one was with a Christian publishing house, another was with a seminary, and but there was this organization from New England, from Boston, that he remembers Don Ewing was a favored person in this area for a while. He was on the board, and he sent a letter to Dad. And Dad would always say, the opening line was, "We heard you were interested in considering this." And Dad had never heard of the organization. He thought that was a chuckle, but it pulled him in. And I was just out in California with my brother. We went to the Laguna Hills where he took some time to just ask the Lord to give him some direction. And he pretty consistently would bring up Isaiah 43:19, where he said, forget the former things. I'm doing a new thing. Can you see it? That's how he would say it to people. And Dad had that green shoot philosophy, which fit into New England because it was a winter tundrum when it comes to church life across New England. And everybody knew that. but he was always, as Gordon said, he was always very positive, looking for the green shoots. Where is God at work? And one of the things he did was he asked the board when he was going to fly out, and we as a family stayed for my entire senior year in high school. And I think he pretty much blamed me for that because I insisted. But when he came out, Billy Graham was doing his Minneapolis Congress. And Dad asked the board, hey, could I stop there first and be at that Congress, and then I'll come to Boston? They said, sure. So he went through the Congress. At the very end of the Congress, he would say, Billy stood there and he said, because it was very much a world Congress at points, he said, you need to go back and do this where you are. So people wondered where the idea of Congress came that had a long run in New England. Many are still alive and remembers those famous days and years. But it was that idea of Congress. He came to the EANE. They had a winter pastors conference that they would do down in Tremont Temple. I remember as a freshman in college sitting down and sitting in the back row with the youth minister, the student minister I was with, and up there was Paul Reese. And I still remember 2 or 3 things Paul said in that time. He was addressing pastors at the time. And it was that really kind of started the gears, because in years before that, the whole lay movement, faith at work, other kinds of movements were saying lay people count. We need to see what God's doing in the church and God's people. And that's where Dad started to get the idea of Congress, and not just pastors, but we need to move out and let church leaders and others across New England have that time. So that's where Congress came, and at least in its idea form.
Yeah.
And then that was inaugurated in the early 70s. And frankly, Gordon, I think, it was doing it at the Temple, but I'm not sure the year, it was a 73, somewhere in there, early in your ministry, we shifted to Grace Chapel. And that said, we're getting out of the Boston mindset. We need to be New England. So at least we moved to the suburbs. So part of that was just sort of signaling we're here for the whole church in New England. But just that's the history. And Dad would recount that at different times. Yeah.
Dennis, I'm curious, and this may explode in my face, but was it one of the evenings at the Congress at Grace Chapel where Chuck Colson was speaking and a bat flew into the sanctuary and kept swirling around?
Yeah, it was. That's right.
One of the more memorable moments in his history.
Right. And again, not to just talk about Congress, but, at that point, you just read people's books. That's all you would do. Rather than come, and the plenary speakers would be people that you were appreciating because of their ministry and the direction of their life and some of their writings, et cetera. But the workshops were always leaders from New England. And that's where you began to see there's a wealth of understanding, appreciation, and learning that can go on right within New England rather than just the rest of the nation. Mm-hmm. And that was a good, I remember one particular time where Francis Schaeffer, who had cancer at the time, and everybody knew when they came to that Congress that this was the last time they would actually see Francis or even hear Francis. And Francis was a Germanic professorial type, and he stood up, and it was basically a lecture for 20 minutes. It was basically, he was almost reading from his book, classic, but everybody loved it. And the next person who stood up within like 5 minutes was Luis Palau. And Luis Palau, 15 minutes was his introduction, just how great it was to be with Francis Schaeffer. It was just, and the contrast really pictured for me that variety and flavor of we're all different. We all have something to contribute. And it kind of brought people together. But there were some kind of hilarious times in those moments, one being the bat. Yeah.
And so Congress, for folks who may not know today, or Congress on Evangelism, I think was the official name. And so it grew to become thousands of believers coming together for a weekend. I think back in Boston by the time it got that big. And sorry. And it's all the big names of the day: Bill Hybels, Rick Warren, Johnny Erickson, Gordon. I asked Gordon one time, who did he remember was at Congress, and he said it would be easier to list who wasn't there because everybody came to Congress.
Yeah.
Now, Steve Mackey.
I have a memory.
Go ahead.
I have a memory of being up at our home in New Hampshire, where we used to retreat every week, and we had some septic tank problems. And I looked out the door to see what the workmen were doing. There were two of them standing over this big pit with this awful smell coming out, and they were looking at a piece of paper together. And I went out, "What are you doing?" "Well, there's this thing called Congress that's going on in Boston, and I'm trying to talk him into going with me." We'd even reached the toilets of New England with the publicity.
And so Dennis, what I heard you saying is we bring in national speakers to be the kind of big keynote necessary, but all the workshops and stuff that are going on is New England pastors sharing and learning from each other on whatever the topic of the day might have been.
Right. And I think that
I must say, it would be a cruel thing to do, but you could also make a very interesting list of those who did not make it in New England, who came in thinking they were bringing their program or their reputation or their system, and that they could just float it and people would bite it. But it didn't sell like it did in other places. And you recognize that it had to be a woman or a man with a certain depth of personality filled by the Spirit that caught the imagination of the people, because the ones that didn't have that didn't stay long, and they left this region quickly.
And then went around telling everybody how dead it was here.
Right.
Probably.
Yeah, and it was, everybody still was pretty much in their silo around New England. And this was really encouraging in such a warm way to come out and be involved. And what it led to was a spirit of cooperation and collaboration. And over the years, that's just continued to grow in New England. Many times people would say it's because you're under-resourced. But Congress would say, no, we're very resourced. We just need to connect with each other. And Dad was kind of a card-carrying social lubricant. I mean, wherever he went, he was connecting people. And I think, as leadership flows from the top, that's the attitude and mindset that was even in the programmatic elements of just encouraging people to resource one another. So at least the attitude was there. It took time for steps to be taken, but I think we're in our day-to-day, there is more of a strategic collaboration that is going on across New England, but it took relationships and trust and time.
Yeah, and I know when I got involved with Vision New England, so this would have been 2017, 2018, Clive Calver and I were going around meeting with different leaders about what we might do at the request of the board of Vision New England in terms of a rebirthing of the ministry. And the number of people who said, I love Vision New England because of Congress. It was such a formative experience, or it was a transformative experience. It meant so much. It was such a wonderful manifestation of unity. I got saved at Congress. It was just such an impactful event, and people clearly missed and grieved Congress not being there today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think economics, among other things, just made it impossible to keep going.
Yeah, I did find some old stuff that you guys probably would have been aware of, certainly at the time, but about getting letters from people saying, "Hey, this is just getting too expensive for us to do," and and attendance starting to dip because of that, and it getting more expensive even more to do, and so it was. Bill Hybel started his conference, and Rick Warren started his conference, and suddenly it was getting a lot more challenging, and so it could never be what it was today. If we tried to do it again, but all that content is free on the internet and all that kind of stuff. So we figured out some other ways to try and pursue the same kinds of things today. But boy, it just left such a mark with so many people. Yeah. What would, if you think back, is there something you would pull out and say, of everything we saw God doing in that phase, this really stands out as a big story about it, or just a good story that shows a thematic story, or something else that either of you would remember?
it's hard to answer your question in the sense that as the years go by, you realize you're looking at 10 or 12 or 13 years as a whole piece. Now, who came out one year, who came out in another year? So we become quiet when you ask that question. There were no losing conventions. Every one of them had its own unique contribution. And I'll tell you, the people who lived in the cities may not have gotten as much out of Congress as the people who lived in secondary communities, all up and down the coast of Maine, all the way up and through the mountain region of Vermont and New Hampshire. Those people, this was their lifeblood. And they got to do this one thing every year in January. So while some of us might have yawned a little bit because we always saw the celebrities coming to town, the folks up country got one shot. And when they were there, they were at every meeting. They were listening to every speaker they possibly could get their hands on. They went home exhausted, but they got what their money paid for.
Yeah, I would concur, Gordon. There were some tough times. I mean, it was January when they did it. It became known as the Donald Gill snowstorm because 2 or 3 times the snowstorm came and hit, but it didn't dissolve. And to be frank, my dad would even say at that point you weren't paying much to go to Congress, but it still was a cash cow, and it was a financially undergirded staff for the whole year of ministry. And so it was good. So if they had a bad Congress, but God supplied throughout all of that. And there was a lady from Upper Maine. My dad would speak of this letter that came because I think we're out at Shriners. Remember, we're out at Shriners. I think they had 2 bathrooms for the women. It was unbelievable. I mean, the lines were around Jericho waiting for bathrooms. And there were more details it was a tough Congress when it came to that. And this dad was dealing with all the negative stuff afterwards. He got this letter, and the lady essentially said that, this was such a glorious moment that if you told me it was a meeting in the middle of a cornfield, in the middle of a winter snowstorm, I would be there because this was God's moment with his people. And my dad, I think he framed that sucker and put it right up on the just to remember that one, because there were some tough times, and there were some very difficult times. And when you asked a question there, I guess I have the privilege of knowing some of the backstory or inside story of that. And there was a moment early on where they really wondered if this was in 70, 71, if it was going to make it, because it was just so difficult financially. And at a moment, he actually, my grandfather, his dad, died, and he had to go up to Toronto, who's from Canada, to oversee all the family. And it just happened to be a time where everything else was financially depressed. And Dad said all you could do was just trust the Lord and pray. And he said the staff called him the day after his father's funeral, and they said they just wondered how things were going. And then they said, "Hey, we just wanted to give you just a heads up. You want to hear something about the work here?" He said, "Sure." He said, "Well, you know that grant that you requested about 8 months ago, it came through. Boom. Here's how much money." He said, "Oh, wow, isn't that wonderful?" And he was about to get off the phone and say, "Well, wait a minute, one more thing." He said, "Remember that grant that you did about 1.5 years ago?" He goes, "Yeah, that just came through." And often he would say, that was just clearly the Lord's hand.
Yeah.
And he shared that with me, and I'm not sure he's really open. He was open about sharing that with a lot of other people, but I've tucked that into my back pocket when I'm talking to people in ministry that really feel those times when it's just quivering with failure. And just saying, hey, you just have to trust that God is the one who's going to provide. You do due diligence, trust. And so anyway, there were financial times that were behind the scenes that you could sense this. It's not just Congress it was the patent. Okay. That was the public face. but there were many times where, early on especially, that he felt that. Anyways, those are kind of things that I sort of keep and share with really everybody else to say, stay encouraged.
Yeah.
Things can get really tight.
Join us next Sunday at 2 p.m. on Life Changing Radio or wherever you stream your podcasts to hear the next episode of what I call the Don Gill Years. Thanks for listening. To support this program and accelerate evangelism, go to visionNewEngland.org and click on Donate or click Member to become a partner with us. This program is supported by the Palau Association, who are dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church, and impacting cities worldwide.
At Leadership Transformations, we believe that when you have the right resources to help you slow down and experience a deep and refreshing connection to God, you can become the discerning leader you know you are created to be. Friends, Steve Macchia here, and I have a free gift for your soul. It's called Pathways. Pathways is our weekly email aimed at offering you soul-nourishing content for the journey. It contains readings, prayers, spiritual practices, a link to the Discerning Leader podcast, as well as information about all of our upcoming soul care retreats, workshops, and online offerings. So head on over to leadershiptransformations.org today and sign up for this free resource. It will help you slow down and be more. God bless you, friends.